Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Matthew Park. I'm 36 years old, and today I run Park Medical Innovations, a medical tech conglomerate that's been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, and practically every major healthcare summit around the world. But don't let the headlines fool you. Behind every glossy magazine cover and congratulatory handshake is a truth I've never spoken out loud, until now. I wasn't born a CEO. I was born an afterthought. My father, Richard Park, was the founder of Park Med, a then small but rising medical technology startup based in San Diego. To the world, he was a visionary, a charming Korean-American entrepreneur who built something from scratch. But to me, he was a storm in a tailored suit. Cold. Dismissive. Sometimes cruel. He had two sons, me and Ethan. Ethan was everything I wasn't. Charismatic, handsome, adored by my father. He inherited my dad's smile, his confidence, and, apparently, the keys to his heart. I was the quiet one, the bookworm. The one who stayed up late studying engineering textbooks while Ethan cruised around La Jolla in Dad's Porsche. It didn't matter how many awards I brought home or how many times I made the dean's list at Stanford. I was invisible to my father. If he did look at me, it was usually followed by a sigh or a shake of the head. But my mom, my sweet, steady mother, she was the only warmth in our icy house. She used to tell me, Matthew, one day, you'll build something even your father can't ignore. I clung to that promise like it was oxygen. I joined Park Med straight out of grad school. Not because my father asked me to, he didn't. But because I believed in what the company could be. I started at the bottom, testing sensors, coding firmware, assisting in labs while Ethan sat upstairs in a cushy executive role, giving terrible PowerPoint presentations and taking undeserved credit. Still, I worked my way up. No handouts. No favors. Just late nights, 80-hour weeks, and a relentless desire to create something that could actually help people. I spearheaded the development of our first AI-assisted diagnostic scanner. It put us on the map. Revenue tripled in 2 years. Investors lined up. And what did my father say? Good job, Ethan. I knew you could lead this team. I stood beside Ethan in that meeting. I was the one who led the team. Ethan barely showed up. But it didn't matter. Because in my father's eyes, Ethan was the crown prince. And I was the bastard child he tolerated. Then came the day I thought might change everything. A private boardroom. My father standing at the head of a long walnut table. Ethan beside him, smug as ever. And me, waiting. Hoping. Today's announcement, my father began, marks the next chapter in our legacy. I've decided it's time to begin succession planning. My heart pounded. I'm officially naming Ethan as the next CEO of Park Med. I didn't hear the rest. I couldn't. It was like the air had been punched out of my lungs. 10 years. 10 years of building that empire. Of cleaning up Ethan's messes. Of saving contracts, developing the tech, keeping the company from imploding. And it all ended with those few words. My brother would be CEO. And I was nothing. That night, I drove to the beach and sat in my car for hours, staring at the waves crashing against the shore. I was 35. My father had just spat on my decade of work. And Ethan, who couldn't tell the difference between a neural sensor and a napkin, was about to take credit for everything I had built. I was done hoping he'd ever see me. I was done being quiet. Done being the good son. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the start of something darker. That was the night the seed of revenge was planted. And it was going to grow into something no one in my family would ever forget. They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. I used to think that was just a cliché people said to sound poetic. But after that boardroom meeting, I understood it on a cellular level. For days after my father named Ethan CEO, I couldn't bring myself to show up to work. I'd wake up, sit at the edge of my bed, fully dressed, staring at the door like it was some battlefield I wasn't sure I could survive. I'd built so much, products, teams, even company culture, and yet suddenly, I was just a ghost. A nameless cog in the very machine I had forged with my own blood and breath. I still remember the email that came from HR. Dear Matthew, as part of the transition process, your new role will be redefined under the direction of incoming CEO Ethan Park. Redefined? That's the word they used when they wanted to humiliate you gently. No meetings. No leadership. No acknowledgement. I was shoved into an advisory role, basically a glorified paperweight with no power. My calendar went from being jammed with strategy meetings and innovation briefings to silence. I wandered the office like a ghost, ignored, avoided. Some co-workers, the loyal ones who knew the truth, gave me sympathetic glances. Others just followed the power, bowing to Ethan like he was some kind of savior. And Ethan? He walked around like he'd conquered Everest. I'd watch him from across the glass office as he laughed too loudly, flirted with interns, and made asinine comments in meetings he didn't understand. One day, I caught him explaining our AI diagnostic system to a group of investors and saying, it basically reads X-rays, like Google for doctors. I nearly threw up. That system took me and my team 3 years to develop, 3 years of sleepless nights, of poring over algorithms, of testing and recalibrating and rewriting thousands of lines of code. It had saved lives. But Ethan reduced it to a metaphor he probably stole from a meme. I started drinking. I'd never been a drinker. But suddenly, one whiskey turned into 2, then into 3. And the worst part wasn't the humiliation or the loss of title. It was the silence, from my father. He didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't check in to see how I was taking the transition. He had cut me off like I was an underperforming intern. Like I never mattered at all. One night, I sat alone in my apartment, the lights off, a half-empty bottle on the table, and I stared at an old photo. It was the 3 of us, me, Ethan, and my father, standing outside the ParkMed headquarters on its opening day. I must have been 16. Ethan was 12. My father had his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Not mine. Even back then. I had always been on the outside. That night, something inside me snapped. I wasn't sad anymore. I was done crying. Done feeling sorry for myself. Done being silent. I walked to the closet, pulled out a dusty wooden box my mother gave me before she died. Inside were her letters. I hadn't opened them in years. But something told me I needed to. I unfolded one and read her words, trembling. You were never meant to follow your father's path, Matthew. You were meant to build your own kingdom. Her handwriting was elegant, careful. I could almost hear her voice again. Tears burned down my face. I whispered aloud, then I'll build it, Mom. And I'll burn theirs down while I do. That was the moment despair transformed into resolve. I wasn't going to beg for scraps anymore. I wasn't going to wait for validation that would never come. I was going to take everything they thought they stole from me. And I was going to do it on my terms. I never expected to find the truth in a blood test. After weeks of silently enduring the shame of my demotion, I buried myself in side projects, anything to distract me from the anger brewing inside. But life, as it often does, threw me a curveball I couldn't have seen coming. It started with a call from the hospital. My father had been rushed to the ER. A mild heart attack. Nothing fatal, but serious enough to warrant urgent attention. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, but despite everything, I went. Maybe out of habit. Maybe out of duty. Maybe I just wanted to see the old man vulnerable for once. When I arrived at the hospital, Ethan was already there, tapping away on his phone like it was a board meeting. "He'll be fine," Ethan said, not even looking up. "He needs a transfusion, though. They're checking if we're a match." I nodded and followed the nurse to give my blood sample. Routine, I thought. Quick prick. Get it over with. But 20 minutes later, the doctor came back with a furrowed brow. "Mr. Park," he said quietly, "there's something unusual. Your blood type is B positive. Your father's is O negative." I blinked. "Okay." He hesitated. "Biologically, it's not possible. You can't be his son." The words crashed into my skull like a freight train. I stood there, stunned, as the walls of my world cracked open. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. My voice sounded foreign to me. "I'm saying, scientifically, Richard Park cannot be your biological father." I walked out of that hospital with shaking hands and a mind in chaos. It was like my whole life had been a lie. Suddenly, everything made sense. The distant glances. The cold silences. The word he screamed at me when I was 12 after I knocked over a display case at a company event. "You bastard." I thought it was just rage. Now I knew it was truth. He always knew. And he hated me for it. I sat in my car for nearly 2 hours in the hospital parking lot, the rain drumming against the windshield. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel. If Richard wasn't my father, then who was? And more importantly, did my mother know? That question haunted me more than the rest. That night, I dug out the wooden box again, the one with all her old letters. Tears streamed down my face as I read them one by one, searching for any hidden truth. And then I found it. A letter dated just 6 months before she died. "My dearest Matthew. If you're reading this, it means you've already learned what I was too afraid to tell you. Yes, the man you've called father is not your blood. But you are mine. You are my son in every sense that matters. I chose to carry you. I chose to love you. And if I had to do it again, I'd choose you every single time." My chest tightened. I could barely breathe. "You were born of a terrible event, something I never wanted, something I still can't write about. But from the moment I held you, I saw light, not pain. You gave me strength, Matthew. You gave my life meaning." I sobbed into my hands, that letter clutched against my chest like a lifeline. She knew. She had endured something terrible, something no woman should ever face, and still, she chose to love me. Fiercely. Unconditionally. My father, Richard Park, must have known the truth all along. And instead of compassion, he treated me like a stain on his name. A mistake he had to tolerate. He never saw the man I became. Only the reminder of what my mother survived. That night, I made a promise. Not just for me. But for her. I would not only take back what was mine. I would make sure Richard and Ethan paid for every single scar they left on me, and on her. The revenge I had been quietly planning. It was no longer just business. It was blood. After I learned the truth, the rage inside me went cold. Not fiery. Not explosive. Ice cold. I realized something. Richard Park had never seen me as a son because he knew I wasn't his. And Ethan, my so-called brother, wasn't just the golden boy by accident. He was the only blood Richard believed in. That wasn't favoritism. That was blood loyalty. But now that I knew the truth, I no longer owed them anything. I stopped pretending. I showed up at the office the next morning calm, clean-shaven, and ready. Not for another day of being ignored, but to begin the quiet dismantling of their empire. I wasn't going to throw tantrums. I wasn't going to demand justice. I was going to build it in silence, piece by piece, until it crushed them. Step 1, Power Base. I started with the only thing they always underestimated: relationships. For a decade, I'd been quietly working side by side with the engineers, the coders, the lab techs, the people who actually built the products ParkMed profited from. Unlike Ethan, I remembered birthdays, bought coffee during crunch time, and asked people how their kids were doing. They trusted me. And now I needed that trust to turn into something more. One night, I invited Maria, our lead product developer, to a late dinner at a quiet Korean barbecue spot she liked. Over sizzling beef and soju, I told her the truth, not about my parentage, but about the company. "How long do you think ParkMed can survive with Ethan as CEO?" I asked. She stared at me for a long time, then answered softly, honestly. 2 years. Maybe less. I nodded. I'm not asking for rebellion. I'm asking for preparation. If I had a way to take control, would you follow me? She didn't blink. Absolutely. That's when I knew, the first domino had tipped. Over the next 6 months, I carefully expanded my inner circle. I met with department heads for harmless coffee chats. I sat with junior developers and asked them about their frustrations. I offered solutions. Encouragement. Vision. I became the silent leader Ethan never noticed, because he was too busy buying followers for his LinkedIn profile and posting quotes from books he never read. Step 2, Financial Leverage. While Ethan burned cash on failed ad campaigns and pointless rebrands, I quietly began buying up ParkMed stock, through shell LLCs, offshore accounts, and private investors I'd cultivated during my Stanford years. I reached out to one in particular, Charles Griffin, a former venture capitalist who once tried to buy into ParkMed before Richard shot him down. He remembered me. "You were the quiet one at those board dinners," he said. "The one who actually listened." I told him everything, again, not about my paternity, but about my vision. ParkMed could be more than a product company, I told him. It could define the future of early diagnostics, remote surgeries, AI medical assessments. But not with Ethan. Not with the board asleep at the wheel. He asked what I needed. "Shares," I said. "Silently purchased. Spread across different entities. We need voting power when the time comes." Charles agreed, with one condition: when the dust settled, he wanted a seat at the table. Done. Over the next year, my allies and I acquired over 32% of ParkMed stock, just shy of a controlling interest, but more than enough to start flexing influence. Step 3, the skeleton closet. Ethan had skeletons. I just needed to find them. I hired a forensic accountant named Grace, who specialized in corporate audits and, let's say, creative bookkeeping. She combed through years of Ethan's financial activity. And it didn't take long. Over $4.2 million in company funds had been reclassified under executive development initiatives, including a week-long bender in Ibiza, a failed influencer partnership with a swimsuit model he was dating, and, most disgustingly, hush money paid to a junior employee after a harassment complaint. We had emails. Transfers. Contracts. Everything. I compiled it all into a digital folder labeled "The Fall of the House of Park." Step 4, the board. This was the final, and riskiest, part. Richard still held the chairman role. Ethan was CEO. But the board had grown frustrated in whispers and sideways glances. Sales had plateaued. Vision was murky. Public trust was slipping. So I started meeting board members for private dinners. I didn't pitch myself. I didn't even badmouth Ethan. I just told the truth. We're dying from the inside. And then I showed them the data. The projections. The proof of malpractice. Their eyes went wide. One said, "If this got out, our stock would tank overnight." I nodded. "I can fix this," I told them. "But I need your votes." And I meant it. I wasn't just trying to take down my father and brother. I was trying to save the company I had actually built from the inside. All that was left now, was timing. And one last move. Because what Ethan and Richard didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I wasn't coming for a promotion. I was coming for everything. They never saw it coming. Not because I was clever, but because they never believed I had it in me. Ethan still strutted around Park Med like he was born to lead, cracking jokes in meetings, pushing another tone-deaf ad campaign, and posting Instagram stories from his Porsche about hustle culture. Richard, my so-called father, barely came in anymore. He was coasting on legacy, basking in old press clippings, refusing to accept that the company he founded was teetering on the edge. And I smiled. I nodded. I played the dutiful, invisible son. But beneath that smile, I was sharpening knives. The first strike, public doubt. It started with a quiet leak. I sent an anonymous tip to a mid-tier medical tech blog, nothing scandalous, just numbers, declining quarterly growth, internal restructuring, erratic leadership. The article published on a Monday morning with the headline, "Is Park Med losing its pulse?" It wasn't viral, but it hit where it mattered: investors. Clients. I saw the ripple effect instantly. Calls came in. Contracts hesitated. The board asked questions. And Ethan? He panicked. He called an emergency meeting, red in the face, blaming the PR team. Fix this. Get ahead of it. Blame inflation. But there was no fixing it, because the numbers were real. And I was just getting started. The second strike, shareholder shuffle. 2 weeks later, at the quarterly shareholder briefing, I sat quietly as Ethan rambled through a disastrous presentation full of vague buzzwords and next-gen promises. When the floor opened for questions, I stood. Calm. Confident. Controlled. As head of product strategy, I began, I'd like to know how we plan to rebound from last quarter's 18% drop in client retention, especially considering we haven't launched a new product in 14 months. You could hear a pin drop. Ethan stammered. We have initiatives underway. Which ones? I asked. Could you clarify for the board? He looked at the chairman's seat, at our father. But Richard didn't speak. Because even he knew I was right. Later that day, I got a call from Robert Yoon, a senior board member. You've got them rattled, he said. Keep going. I didn't need encouragement. I already knew what came next. The third strike, the dossier. A week later, every board member, and a few key investors, received a discreet envelope. Inside was the fall of the House of Park. Bank statements. Signed expense reports. Email screenshots. HR complaints buried under NDAs. Ethan's crimes, in black and white. From sexual misconduct to embezzlement disguised as branding expenses. By the end of that week, 5 board members had called me. 2 investors threatened to pull out unless certain behaviors were addressed. Richard tried to control the narrative. He called a meeting, tried to defend Ethan. This is nothing more than internal jealousy, he said. Brothers squabbling. But it was too late. Because I had timed it perfectly. And now, the board demanded a vote. Not in 6 months. Not at the next retreat. Now. The fourth strike, the boardroom. It was a Friday afternoon. Overcast skies. A thick tension hanging in the boardroom like smoke. 12 people sat around the polished oak table. At the head sat Richard, stiff as a statue. Ethan slouched next to him, pale, trying to look calm. I sat at the far end. Silent. Watching. The chairman opened the floor. Mr. Matthew Park has called for a vote of no confidence against the CEO. Ethan stood up. This is a joke. A vendetta. He's jealous. Always has been. I didn't respond. I just opened my laptop and cast the image to the big screen. Slide after slide of evidence filled the room. Company money misused. Employee complaints ignored. Faked performance reports. Lies, one after the other. No yelling. No accusations. Just facts. Richard clenched his fists. You're destroying this family. And finally, I looked him in the eye and said, no. You did. The day you made me invisible. Silence. Then came the vote. Hands raised, one by one. 10-2. Ethan was out. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, watching Ethan's world collapse like he had done to mine 1,000 times. And then, the final twist. Robert, the board elder, turned to Richard. Mr. Park, with all due respect, we also believe it's time for you to step down as chairman. Richard's eyes widened. He looked around, desperate. No one came to his defense. He had built Park Med. But now even his oldest allies saw what it had become under his rule. I stood up. For the future of this company, for its employees, its clients, and the people who rely on our products, there has to be accountability. That starts today. The vote was unanimous. And just like that, the empire that rejected me, now belonged to me. But the most shocking twist was still to come. I thought the war was over. Richard was out. Ethan disgraced. I was voted in as the new CEO of Park Med with full board support and a team ready to follow me into the future. The applause from that day still echoes in my memory, polite, restrained, professional. But inside me, I expected to feel triumphant. Vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. Something didn't sit right. In the days that followed, I buried myself in restructuring, cleaning up Ethan's mess, freezing outgoing payments, reactivating the AI project he let rot on a drive somewhere. Maria became CTO. I promoted overlooked talent. I held my first all-hands meeting, and I saw something I'd never seen in this company before. Hope. But at night, the unease returned. I kept rereading my mother's letter. The part that haunted me most. You were born of a terrible event, something I still can't write about. I had never questioned it. I thought I knew what she meant. Until the day Paul, my private investigator, called. Matthew, you might want to sit down for this. He had kept digging, long after I told him to stop. I found a sealed court document, dated about 36 years ago. It lists your mother, Elizabeth Park, as the plaintiff in a sealed civil suit, against Richard Park. My breath caught. What kind of suit? I asked, though part of me already knew. Paul hesitated. A paternity dispute. She accused Richard of forcing himself on her before they were married. She dropped the case when he offered to marry her. My vision blurred. No, I whispered. I'm sorry, Paul said softly. Matthew, you are his son. The words hit harder than any slap Ethan ever gave me. Harder than being ignored my whole life. I was Richard Park's son. He had lied. He had known. He had told me my whole life I wasn't his, when I was. When the truth was even darker than I could imagine. I wasn't the product of some stranger or random event. I was the result of his abuse, and my mother's silence. She had endured him, married him, protected me, while he twisted the story to make me feel like the outsider. The mistake. I was his, and he had rejected me, not because I didn't belong, but because I reminded him of what he did. And Ethan? He wasn't born until 3 years later. I did a DNA test. Paul was right. I was the firstborn son. The rightful heir. And Richard knew it all along. That's why he hated me. Not because I wasn't his. But because I was. For days, I didn't speak to anyone. I locked myself in my apartment, blinds shut, the world outside irrelevant. Not even Maria or Charles could reach me. I just read the documents again and again. The sealed court case. The blood test. The letter. The silence. I had spent my entire life thinking I wasn't Richard Park's son, and it turned out I was the only one who ever truly was. But knowing the truth didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a curse. I thought back to all the times he hit me. The names he called me. The way he looked at me with disgust, like I was less than human. But now I understood. He hated me because I proved what he was capable of. He couldn't erase the past. So he tried to erase me. That was his final failure. And it would be my final justice. The confrontation. I went to his house unannounced. The villa in La Jolla still stood like a monument to his ego, pristine, grand, soulless. He opened the door himself. His eyes widened when he saw me. "You," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Me." He tried to shut the door. I stepped forward. "We're going to talk. Now." He didn't argue. Maybe something in my eyes made him remember the part of me he could never kill. We sat in silence in that same living room where he once called me a bastard. Where he shattered a glass near my mother's face. Where I used to hide behind a couch and pray for peace. I pulled the documents from my coat. I laid them on the table. His face didn't flinch. "You knew," I said. His eyes flicked toward the window. "You knew you were my father. The blood tests. The court record. The threats. All of it." He said nothing. I spent my life thinking I was some outsider. That Mom made a mistake. That I didn't belong. Still nothing. But the truth is, I'm the only one who does. Finally, he looked at me. "Is that what you came here for? Validation? A tearful apology?" "No," I said, standing slowly. "I came here to say this." I leaned in, my voice cold, steady. "You didn't break me." He blinked. "You tried. For 36 years, you tried to make me feel worthless. You let Ethan trample over everything I built. You lied about who I was. You turned my mother's silence into your power." I stepped closer. "But I'm still here. Stronger. Smarter. And now, this company, your company, is mine. And I'll make damn sure your name disappears from every hallway and every plaque like you were never even part of it." He tried to speak, but I cut him off. "I don't need your apology. I don't even need your anger." I paused. "I just want you to live long enough to watch everything you tried to bury, rise higher than you ever imagined." Then I turned and walked out. I never looked back. A new legacy. 2 months later, ParkMed officially became Maven Biotech. We erased the old branding. Rewrote our mission. Introduced a new code of ethics. And I made one bold decision the board didn't expect. I made every employee a shareholder. Because I knew what it felt like to be invisible. To be overlooked. To be underestimated. Never again, not on my watch. Maria became COO. We launched 3 life-saving devices in 18 months. We were featured on the cover of Time. But none of that compared to the moment I stood on the stage at our new global headquarters, holding the final framed object we would hang on the wall. A letter from my mother. "You were never meant to follow his path. You were meant to build your own." Her handwriting, bold and elegant. I looked out over the crowd, engineers, janitors, investors, interns, and I said only one thing. "This is our path now." And the room erupted. And as for Ethan, he tried to sue me. Claimed wrongful termination. Misuse of board influence. Defamation. His case didn't survive a week in court. Too much evidence. Too many burned bridges. Last I heard, he was trying to launch a wellness brand in Bali and still living off what was left of his trust fund. Let him. I have nothing left to prove to him. Or to anyone. The final entry. Sometimes, late at night, I open the old wooden box. Her letters are still there. Worn, weathered, but whole. Like me. I've learned something through all this. Truth doesn't always set you free right away. Sometimes, it breaks you first. But if you survive it, if you own it, it becomes your weapon. Your armor. Your redemption. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.